This is Between the Brackets, a Mediawiki podcast, episode 72, October 27th, 2020. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and I'm honored to have on the program Grant Ingersoll, who is the CTO of the Wikimedia Foundation. He's been there for just a little over a year now, so I figured this would be a good time to talk to him. Before joining the Wikimedia Foundation, Grant had a successful career in the open source business world, focused on, I think, both search and machine learning. He's a co-author of the 2013 technical book Taming Text, and he hosts the podcast Develomentor. So Grant, it's a pleasure to have you here, and welcome to the program.
Hey, Yaron. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
That's great. So where do you live?
I am currently based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, although just like with the new job, I just moved here last year, and so I still feel like it's not quite home yet.
Yeah. I was going to say something, forget it. So I thought I was being clever by having you on to do a recap of your first year, but then I learned that in November you'll be speaking at Open Source Lisbon, which is a virtual event where you'll also be sharing what you learned during your first year at the Wikimedia Foundation. At least mine will be up first.
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting ride so far. There's a lot to learn here, so it is top of mind for me as to just looking back on all the things that have gone on. I think it's been interesting, Yaron, like the week I started, or perhaps the week right before I started, we had a massive DDoS attack against the site.
Oh, really? Okay.
Back last year. So it was like, hey, Grant, welcome to the foundation and welcome to Wikipedia. But, it was actually a really good galvanizing of trying to figure out then, like, how do we deal with those kinds of situations, or how do we more effectively deal with them going forward? Because they've, it's obviously something we don't want our users to have to experience, of not being able to get to the site.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I want to get to all the Wikimedia Foundation stuff, but first I want to talk about your background. You co-founded a company called Lucidworks, as I understand, which is sort of like the Red Hat for open source search, maybe? Is it?
Yeah, that's kind of what we started under. Back in 2007, I was doing a lot of work on Lucene and Solar. Lucene is what underpins Elasticsearch. So many of your listeners probably have heard of Elasticsearch. Lucene is the Java library underneath that. And a bunch of us in the open source community got together under, what you would call these days an open source 1.0 model, right? Of providing support, providing consulting, providing kind of the basics around a pretty popular project. And then over the years, it of course evolved.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a 2.0 model. What is that, like a software as a service or something?
Yeah, I would say maybe they're even on 3.0. Like, I think you're continuing to see the business landscape evolve around open source, right? In terms of what is viable for both, developing community and caring for the open source, as well as, as they like to say, putting food on the table in terms of meeting your goals as a company and growing your user base and, having the right amount of support contracts.
Sure.
For us there, we started off with that just support only model, and there just wasn't enough users. And so then we looked at how do we complement and extend the open source. That was the model we took. Other companies look at it as like, how do I add in features that are proprietary or like replace the innards with something more performant or other aspects. So there's a lot of different ways to slice that.
Right. Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot on this podcast, is people trying to do that with Mediawiki and talking about the different, business models and stuff. Although no one's really making money off of proprietary extensions, which I guess is good. What were you specifically doing at Lucidworks?
Yeah, so I had I like to tell people I probably reinvented myself 5 or 6 times there. I think, as a founder, you go through that kind of thing quite a bit as your company grows. So the first year or so, it was all hustle. Well, it was all hustle the whole time, but the early years, it was a lot of just hardcore low level engineering, building product.
Right.
And then as we started shipping product, I took on more of a field facing role and was out meeting with customers doing, I think I did everything. I wrote our first training. I know I did a number of technical sales. I was often doing consulting. I put a lot of miles on the airplane. And then as the company grew and we got more people in place, I shifted into like full on CTO role. There was a number of years I ran the entire engineering department. And then the last few years, I took on much more of a both outward facing as well as generative role in terms of, leading up like our machine learning strategy and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there was a guy in this program named Eric Bernhardson who does search stuff at the Wikimedia Foundation. Um, so most of what I know about text search is actually from that one episode. Um, but anyway, we talked about Elasticsearch, which you mentioned. That's what the Wikimedia Foundation now uses. It's developed by a company called Elastic, which I'm guessing you've heard of.
Yep.
So Lucidworks and Elastic are both open source search companies, and both sort of based around. I mean, they're both based around Lucene to some extent. They're both super successful, although Elastic seems to be super successful. No offense.
Yeah. Yeah. No. None taken. Elastic definitely, found their niche or found and grew in an area that we hadn't been addressing. We took a much different route to market. They focus a lot more on logs
Right.
and kind of graphs and using search for, kind of like what Splunk does. We took a much more approach around like e-commerce and enterprise search and helping people find rich documents, if you will. So just different paths, but yeah, they caught lightning in a bottle. They went IPO, and I'm still friends with at least one of their founders and know all the other ones. And
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
I congratulate them on their success, and I hope my company has it someday as well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's nice to hear. Well, this is kind of a silly question, but how does it feel to now be using your competitor's product?
Yeah, well, and at the end of the day, like both Solar and Elasticsearch, from what's shipped in the open source, are pretty comparable feature wise. I always like to tell people they have some features that Solar doesn't have. Solar has some features, and there's actually a really healthy kind of leapfrogging back and forth there. So, I mean, it's, would I love it if we were on Solar and all the stuff that I'd built on? Yeah, but am I going to go change that in CTO? That's not at the top of my priority list at this point in time. I'm pretty proud of what we do on the search front. We have a lot of really smart people on that team, and there's a lot of great community members
Yeah.
who contribute there as well. And like just the sheer number of languages we support in the product, or in the Mediawiki and the overall ecosystem, as well as search, is pretty staggering. So
Yeah, yeah, sure. I've said it before on the show, but I'm not aware of any software, proprietary or otherwise, that has the language support that MediaWiki does.
yeah,
And
I
and the peripheral stuff like the search and all that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my very first jobs I ever had in search was working on multilingual and cross-lingual content. And I think at the time we supported 5 languages. So to come here and see us doing like 300 plus, it just really warms my heart. I mean, this is, especially at the search level where you have to have awareness of the language itself, right? So this goes beyond just having something like a Unicode support where you can represent the character encodings and represent the language. You actually have to have knowledge to be able to parse and make that content searchable in a way that end user is going to be able to understand. So it's just truly amazing.
Yeah. I want to switch gears, as they say, you also have your own podcast, which is exciting, which is called Develomentor. I assume Develomentor was already taken.
Yeah, it was. I actually, I don't know if it was. I just liked. I don't know. Growing up, I remember the tilt-a-whirl. So just this notion of the O in the middle and kind
Ah,
of this. So it was like Develomentor was the original like play on words of development and mentoring, bringing them together. So
yeah, okay.
because that's really what this show is about is trying to help people gain insight into how to grow their career in technology, right? And so,
Yeah,
playing on words.
yeah, okay. Yeah, or like something Orama or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Futurama,
yeah.
Tilt-a-whirl. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um, yeah, so yeah, I've listened to a few episodes. It's really interesting. I recommend it, anyone to listen to it. Um, yeah, it seems like there's a focus on people who have non-conventional backgrounds who didn't major in computer science, that kind of thing. Is that
Yeah,
is that true?
I mean, I definitely I definitely work towards representing and bringing on people who go across the spectrum of all the different ways you can participate in tech is how I think about it, right? So, just in my own experience, I went a pretty traditional route, but then things really took off for me when I started doing things differently than kind of the traditional route, right? Like I specifically started learning how to do sales and how to focus on better communication skills. And I saw in my own company the benefit we had once we've got people who could do marketing in a technical way, do sales in a technical way, who could talk to customers more effectively. And so that kind of set the stage for then wanting to show people that there's a lot of different ways to participate in tech than just the, hey, I show up and write code all day. I love writing code myself, but there's other ways to participate, and this is it is a big tent play, if you will.
A big, yeah.
Big tent, like everybody can
Yeah, no,
participate in
yeah,
tech.
the
Tech,
big tent play thing. I had to think about that. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Right.
yeah.
Um. Yeah. What was I gonna say? Well, I mean, okay. There. Yeah. Well, there are, but you do also talk to programmers who came into it unconventionally.
Yeah,
People
I
who
mean,
do
we've had
what you call just coding all day. Whatever.
Yeah, well, like we've had self-taught developers on this show. We've had developers who were English majors. We've had developers who've gotten PhDs in computer science. We tend to primarily have four different tracks, if you will. Like there's obviously the software engineer and related field. We tend to have a lot of product managers on as well. For people who don't want to be coding but want to be in the mix of developing tech. We have a handful of sales engineers on, and then we have had a fair number of data scientists, but we've
Yeah.
also brought on marketing and other people. Like I'm open to people who want to show, and then I've had a number of freelancers, for instance. So like I said,
Yeah.
trying to highlight that you can participate in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's something that really speaks to me because I think there are a lot of people who could have a great career in technology but just get scared off because it seems too complicated or boring or whatever it is.
Yeah, or they hear I'm not good at math, so therefore I can't be in computer science for some reason. That old
Yeah.
saying just is just not true.
Yeah. Well. So I want to ask about that. I mean, obviously, you've talked to a lot of people. Do you feel like there are certain personality types, some kind of traits that do well in programming or technology, or is something that's literally for everyone?
Well, I mean, I think it's for people who want it to be. I'm not one of those that think that everybody has to know how to code. I do believe that people should be aware of the impacts of code, and they should understand the choices that go into building good code. Because I think in this day and age, you do have to be up on the impact code is going to have on you and your career. Um, you know, I've met so many different people with so many different personality types who write code all day for a living that, I think the old, stereotypes just don't even apply anymore. And that really speaks to the success of technology, right? And the success of code and how important it is in our society. So I don't see so many along those lines. I tend to see people who are coming on the show in terms of how they think about their careers and the different approaches they do. And so that's been endlessly fascinating to me is, some folks are very structured, they're very plan oriented, they're very into doing it. They've got a long-term plan. Other people are more like, hey, I'm going to go with opportunities as they come. Some people are very much about the idea they're working on. Other people are very much about the people they're working with. Obviously, those are putting them at extreme. Nobody's, all one or the other. But
Sure.
those are kind of some of the patterns I've seen emerge more.
Yeah. I definitely agree with the idea that enthusiasm plays a big role in it. If you enjoy it, if it interests you, then chances are you're going to be able to do well.
Well, and it's funny, right? Like it used to be like when I was early on in my programming, it was all about like, being a back end engineer and like the front end, like that's the easy stuff, right? And it's just amazing, like in the last, 5-10 years, how much that's reversed even, right? So the front end stack is as complicated as the back end these days, right? So it's evolving.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when you get to stuff like Node.js or whatever, yes. Well, that's sort of back and front end. Here's something else I wonder. I think about a lot, which is for someone who just graduated high school and knows they want a career as a programmer. Is there any real value to getting a college degree?
Oh, wow. My son is currently enrolled as a computer science major.
Okay, well, yeah.
And so I'm paid. So we're paid for
Right.
that. But I mean, I think it depends on what you want.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't think it's a requirement like it used to be. But there certainly are some values and some things that you can get from having a college degree in terms of, and again, like they're not mutually exclusive, but when you think about setting yourself up for success, a college degree can at least, if you're up for it, ideally instill some disciplined thinking, some structured thinking. It can give you kind of some of the theory. You can, and this is the beauty of the internet, and of course the beauty of sites like Wikipedia is you can often learn all of that out in the open and for free as well,
Sure.
if you are self-motivated. So some people need the structure to learn and other people don't. And to each their own is how I look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sure. Wikipedia and other sites, YouTube, everything else has really changed the landscape, of course. But
well, and open source as well. Like you can go look at any of these successful projects, and like that's a master class in and of itself, right?
yeah, sure. I mean, I think it doesn't get enough credit as just a way to get started in programming. I mean, you can be 13 years old and start contributing to open source projects and learn a tremendous amount that way, and actually help do something useful.
For sure.
You also have some kind of consulting business associated with the podcast?
So not really. I mean, I have my sister actually I've paired up with. She runs a coaching business, and so for people who are looking for coaching on resumes and things like that. So
I see. Okay.
yeah. So I just and it ends up being just lead flow into other people who are doing those kinds of things.
I get it.
So,
Other people are the Develomentors.
yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about the Wikimedia Foundation. What? Well, I guess it's a two-part question. What made you leave Lucidworks, and what attracted you to the Wikimedia Foundation specifically?
Yeah, no, that's well. At Lucidworks, I mean, I mentioned earlier I had reinvented myself probably 5 or 6 times there, just with different roles, and and what was coming ahead was yet another reinvention. And I was just looking at that and looking at other things that were going on in my life. Like I mentioned, around the same time I moved here to Charlotte, my son went off to college, and then it just so happened that the opportunity for the CTO role at the foundation showed up at the same time. And I think all of those things together combined, I mean, I've spent most of my life working on knowledge and access to knowledge. And
Yeah.
where else can you do that at the same scale but the foundation and these projects? I mean, it's just absolutely amazing the impact that this movement has had on the world, and to have some small part of that just seemed like too good to pass up.
Yeah.
So here I am.
All right, cool. So I was going through the list of CTOs, and I realized I've actually met most of your predecessors, at least briefly, which makes me even more embarrassed to say that I don't really know what the CTO of the Wikimedia Foundation does. So, yeah, what is it that you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, and it's interesting, Yaron, because CTO means different things at different companies. At my last company, like I was primarily I mentioned it, there was a chunk of time where I was running engineering, and there's another chunk of time where I was out in the field, right? But here at the foundation, the CTO team, so I run the technology department. We primarily have the product and technology as the main writers of software, obviously working with the community on those things as well. But you can kind of think of it's almost like that split we were just talking about earlier. We're kind of the technology department is kind of the data centers up to the APIs. So we have, we run the data centers, we deploy the software, we maintain the software in production. We have a number, what you might know of and your listeners know of as the platform team, which is staffing of folks. I know you've had some prior guests who are on that team who
Yeah.
work on Mediawiki itself. I have the search team under me. So you mentioned Eric earlier, the research team, the analytics team. Our technical engagement team is where we do a lot of, cloud services that are provided out to the foundation. So it's kind of like all of that back-end services, and then the product side of the house, they have front-end engineers who are primarily working on the end user experience, the editing experience, the user experience, if you will, right?
Yeah. Uh, okay. I mean, okay. That's
So it's running an engineering team for the
Yeah.
most part. I mean, we have other people besides just engineers, but
yeah. So I mean, um, well, the decision making setup is quite interesting at the Wikimedia Foundation, obviously, because you've got all these quote unquote stakeholders and all of that. I want to get to that, but I mean, what's it? I don't even know. I'm not even sure how to ask it. But what's an example of some decision that you were involved in as CTO? I don't even know. I'm not even sure where that's going.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes down to like, I think I'm routinely asking the question, do we have the right infrastructure in place? Do we have the right architecture? Do we have the right technology choices? Do we have the right people and processes that support us being successful in supporting the movement, supporting the technical contributors, supporting the broader ecosystem, if you will, as I'm sure you're aware of, right? So, I mentioned at the top of the show, there's this DDoS question, right? Like, what do we do about that? That's a technical decision that lands in my department. It's not something I would declare from on high of we shall do this, but it's working through with the team. What's an appropriate response? How do we align it with our budget? How does it align with our values? How do we make sure it serves our goals around privacy and all of those kinds of aspects, such that we can then deliver a solution that helps make the site more secure from bad actors, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example of something that's probably public facing. There's other things internally, like, our analytics stack. We're right now looking at some updates to our workflow, right? To the workflow engines we use. Your listeners might have heard of things like Spark and Hadoop and those kinds of things. We're looking at modernizing some of those capabilities with some newer software. What are the right choices? Again, like, I wouldn't make that decision from on high, but like working with the team to figure out, and the contributors and the users and the stakeholders, as you said, working with them to come up with something that fits all of the criteria, right?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It sounds, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, it sounds like you're describing yourself as sort of a facilitator, like just helping to move things along, and getting consensus.
Yeah, I think and that's more and more of what I think a modern leader looks like anyways. You hear the words servant leader or coach. I mean, there's definitely decisions I have to make about, budgets and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm a big believer that we ought to, the people who know how to make these decisions best are the engineers on the ground, and the people around them, the product managers, et cetera. And so in many ways, I look at leadership as, how do you provide them the capabilities to be successful, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of unexpected surprises, obviously you didn't know when you joined the WMF that 6 months into it there would be a global pandemic, and basically an unprecedented shutdown. How has that transition been?
Yeah, I mean, there's, yeah, to say the least, there's been challenges. I mean, I think, I'm really proud of actually the way the foundation has shown up in this. This is, there's no playbook. There's no playbook for leadership anyways, right? Like, you can go read books, but those are all theory anyway. And worked for may contain ideas that worked for somebody else. But, when you're in the seat and you have specific things in front of you, you got to figure out what to do. And so you have to have frameworks in place, and you have to know what your values and principles are. And so when I think the pandemic, hit, like all of us, I think where there was a lot of shock and trying to just figure out, okay, what does this actually mean? And like I said, I'm really proud of the way we approached it from a people first strategy, which is, let's take care of the people first and foremost. Let's make sure they have the space to be safe, to provide care for everyone. And again, like, this isn't just a foundation, this is community as well. We had a lot of events going on, those kinds of things.
Sure.
We had to make some hard decisions about things that people had invested a lot of time in, but we had to do that from how do we make sure people are safe and secure and able to process all of that's going on. I'm sure people firsthand who, if it didn't directly affect them, they had friends and family who were directly affected. So just trying to, do that first and foremost. And then, from a technical aspect, it's been really interesting because all those people home actually has translated to a lot more readers.
Right.
So our traffic has gone up quite significantly.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I didn't know that actually. I didn't see that. I don't know if that's been publicized anywhere. I mean, obviously you can see the statistics and stuff, but that's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually, one of the things I'm most proud of behind the scenes that no one would ever even notice, but the team came together and we made a bunch of changes behind the scenes to how we do caching that reduced the number of cache invalidations by something like 40%. And that is no small feat. Anybody who's worked on edge caching, like actually distributing content around the globe, that is no small feat. And that was a cross-team collaboration I'm super proud of with my team. So, and that just behind the scenes made it all that much easier for us to serve that scale.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. Well, speaking of effects of the pandemic, there's I've read that that it's affected a lot of nonprofit organizations in that donations have gone down. I don't know if you can or care to talk about it, but I mean, what's the state of funding like for the Wikimedia Foundation?
Yeah. Well, and I'm not our fundraising expert
Right.
here, but I mean, like you're right. I'm in a nonprofit CTOs cohort. A bunch of other nonprofits, and I know, it's been really stressful for a lot of people, and it's been stressful for us too. You know, we were at least fortunate in that our major fundraising activities primarily fall into the fall and winter
Right, right.
months, and so we had some time to adjust. Whereas, there's plenty of nonprofits, like a lot of nonprofits have these kind of spikes. Like, if you're a public radio listener, you get that ask for
Yeah,
dollars every, 6 months.
right.
And a lot of people do that in the spring. It's the spring fundraiser. So thankfully, our biggest of those wasn't in spring, but we do fundraise around the world, and so those were affected, and then we've had to adjust our timelines and adjust the kind of some of the business as usual on that front. But
Yeah.
I'm really not the expert on the day to day. I do know, like, I run the tech team, or I shouldn't say I run the tech team who supports the fundraising activities resides in the tech department as
Yeah.
well. And so we had to look really hard at, what do we need to do to be able to support an environment where it might be more challenging to raise money. So, a lot of looks at making sure our systems don't fail, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Um, on something more optimistic, I guess, what kind of projects are you excited about at the Wikimedia Foundation these days?
Yeah, Yaron, I'm constantly amazed at all the things that we do with the number of people and the number of volunteers. It is truly a beautiful experience that way. I see, there's big things like abstract Wikipedia, like me coming from the search and that kind of space of natural language processing and machine learning, and this idea that Denny has and the community has of making it able to essentially apply templates and apply lambdas or apply functions to produce content. That absolutely fascinates me as a way to build content, help the community to build content across a number of different domains and languages, et cetera. So that's super exciting. Behind the scenes for us, we, I'm always it's funny when I talk to my peers who run, similar size sites, they're always amazed at how much we do with how little we do it with, right? Having, a team, I think my team's about 130 people. There's probably about 250 people in the foundation who I would say are quote unquote technical, like they're writing code or they're doing products. This whole thing runs on just 2,000 some servers. And that's just mind blowing to me. Like, you look at any size company that delivers the amount of traffic and value that we do
Sure.
at the scale we do. So, like, I'm constantly looking for us behind the scenes at, like, how do we make that more effective? So we've got a number of initiatives behind the scenes around modernizing the stack. We've got work underway around how do we bring forward and enable the community with tooling around machine learning. There's a lot of work, I think, underway in terms of, how do we make it easier for people to contribute technical code, right? So contribute to Mediawiki,
Yeah.
contribute to cloud services.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, actually, that last thing leads to something I wanted to ask about, which is that you. Well, I think this falls into that. You had your own sort of trial by fire back in July with the whole GitLab affair. It's not really a trial by fire because I think it was all over in a few days, but I thought it was interesting anyway.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So
I learned a lot. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead,
well,
sorry.
it's just to summarize briefly for people who don't know, there's Wikimedia Foundation uses software called Garrett to let people check code in I guess there's a widespread dislike of Garrett. I think it's fine, but it doesn't matter. So there's other software called GitLab, which is more user-friendly, and I guess similar to the interface of GitHub, which a lot of people like. So there was just a decision made to switch over from Garrett to GitLab. And you were involved in that decision in some way. You were at least the face of it, I guess. But then some outside developers got upset because no one ever asked for any feedback about it. So then you apologized, and now there's a public discussion page about it, which I think will end right around when this episode comes out. Is that?
Yeah, Yaron, you're right. I mean, it was definitely an interesting process for me. A lot of learning on my part in terms of, recognizing where and when and how, and recognizing that it's not just the decision that's made, but how the decision is made.
Right.
I think was probably the biggest. I've worked in open source for a long time, and like different projects have different, approaches to these kinds of questions. And like I said in my email and responding to that, frankly, I screwed it up. That all lands with me. The team and I were working through a number of different things. We were working primarily on continuous integration first, which is a much more behind the scenes and doesn't really affect most people. And then as we were looking at that, we started, it kind of conflated into looking at code review as well, which obviously does affect a lot more people. Right. And it, as these things sometimes do, you get excited about the opportunity of solving, quote unquote, solving two problems with one. But I missed the boat on recognizing that it wasn't a problem that fully needed to be solved at that moment, even though it felt like it did, right? So we took a step back, and I think we have a much more thoughtful approach to it, and we'll see where it lands.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Wikimedia world is sort of unique in how much say users and outside developers have over all this decision making?
I mean, I've worked in pretty radically open places before as well. I mean, there's, I'm not even sure quite how to answer this, because yes, it is like truly unique. This is a amazingly unique project. And at the same time, like these are questions around how do people work together and how do they collaborate and how do you come to consensus, right? So even in a big old for-profit, like driven by revenue company, you still are beholden to your users. And if your users all hate your interface, I mean, the landscape of companies is littered with failures of companies who failed to respond to what their users wanted. And so in that regard, it's no different, right? It's just where and how do you bring them in the process, right? And I think in this modern internet age, everything is more collaborative, and Wikipedia and Wikimedia does that at the largest of scales, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's
so is that a good non-answer?
No, it's it's a good answer. You're saying you're saying, I guess it's a different scale, but it's the same idea as any other company or organization in the general sense.
Yeah.
You just have millions of users instead of tens of thousands or whatever it is.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's like, how do you build consensus globally? How do you communicate? Like that will forever be something all of us will be working on, right? There is no like one size fits all for that type of question.
Yeah, sure. I want to ask about something which may or may not be related to that, depending on your point of view. There's a popular criticism of the Wikimedia Foundation that its software initiatives are not all successful. I have to preface this by saying I know a lot of work just goes into stuff behind the scenes that like keeping everything secure and all that, as you mentioned, that no one ever sees. And I should also say that you've only been there for a year, so it's not really something specific to you. But the basic criticism is, Wikipedia still looks like it did 10 years ago, and a lot of the high-profile attempts to improve Wikipedia have failed, whether that's liquid threads or structured discussion / flow. There's a project called Athena and Moodbar, article feedback, there's a bunch of others. There have been some successes, obviously visual editor, and then some software that came out of that same visual editor project, like Parsoid, which is going to become a really big deal in OOJS. And there's not to go on and on, but there's things like Upload Wizard and ORes content translation, which have all been which are all in heavy use. By the way, sorry to anyone listening who's not familiar with all those names, but
you can link them up in the show notes.
Yes, I sure can. Yeah. Yeah, actually, Grant, I'm not sure if you have even heard of all those projects like Moodbar or whatever.
I think I've heard of most of them, but yes, I'm still learning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the question is like sorry, I was addressing.
Yeah. It's two things. It's one is there have been a lot of failures, and second is maybe there isn't that much innovation coming out of the Wikimedia Foundation these days. I mean, all those projects I listed, both successful and unsuccessful, are actually from more than 5 years ago. ORes is the most recent. It's just from just about 5 years ago. Now, so yeah, I mean, obviously people have been doing a lot, but I don't know. Yeah, I wonder what you think about that. Maybe could the sense of experimentation have left to some extent from the Wikimedia Foundation?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of a couple of levels to the question there. First off, I would say we are innovating. I think the community is innovating. I look at a lot of the efforts underway, and they feel innovative to me. Some of them are behind the scenes innovative, so end users may not see that. But like I mentioned earlier, like anybody shaving 40% of cache invalidations off of edge caching, that is innovative, right? Now,
right.
Things like abstract Wikipedia, I've been in that space for a long time. That is definitely innovative.
Yeah, sure, right. Well, yeah, abstract Wikipedia, obviously, but it didn't come from the Wikimedia Foundation, for what it's worth.
Sure. Well, I mean, I look at it as it's all together as the movement.
Right.
I mean, I think, Wikidata, we're working really hard on how do we make sure that scales to meet the demands of that type of data. That data is notoriously hard to scale. Some of the things you're talking about on as part of the products, et cetera, like, I don't know about you, but I've never worked at a software company where everything is a success. Even Google is littered with, probably the most successful software company of all time is littered with failures.
Yeah.
And so I would reframe the question as like, what have we learned along the ways about how to make software better? And I think one of the things I take away from a lot of this stuff is how do we incrementally improve, right? So sometimes it won't feel innovative from the outside, but internally, you're working at how do you get better, right? How do you serve more at higher scales? How do you modernize the UI such that you're meeting the needs of the existing users who like it the way it is? But then you also can go out and help the users who are used to other types of interfaces because they're coming from a different background or they're coming with different expectations in terms of interface. So for instance, adding in mobile editing recently, there's a lot of people who weren't able to edit because they didn't, they wanted to be able to edit on their phone is probably the better way of saying it, right? So is that innovation? I think so. Is it something that everybody's going to see? Maybe not.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it sounds like it sounds like you're saying that innovation is more hidden now than it was before because it's the harder stuff of getting things to work well, to perform well, and actually, mobile editing is a good example of a fairly high visibility improvement.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, I like I said, I've been in software long enough. Sounds like you've been around in software for a while. Plenty of we all have projects that we've screwed up in our lives. And I think, I look at and what I'm trying to build in the team and across, how we think about software is this ability to experiment and then learn from it. How can we make small incremental improvements and then grow them if they take hold? And how do we enable that at scale? It's really hard to change a really large project like this, right? You think about it, it took us 20 years to get here. You're not going to change that overnight either.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by changing? What is it that would be changed? Like
Well, let's say even if you did want to radically change, and I'm not even proposing you did, but if say you did, like you wanted an all new look and feel and all new features, et cetera,
Right.
like that's not something you would just go do overnight, right? Like you have to look at how do you incrementally kind of work together with all parties to come up with what makes sense for the future, right?
Yeah. I mean, do you find yourself? Are you ultimately the person who has to decide which projects move forward and which don't? I mean, to take as a random example, I wish I could remember who it was, but somebody was saying that real time collaboration is actually possible now with Mediawiki. Obviously, it would take some work, but the back end now supports it. But there's all these questions about how best to implement it. So having Mediawiki be able to function like, gosh, I'm forgetting. Well, Google Docs or
Like Google Docs, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, not to get too much into that one specific case, but is that the kind of thing where you ultimately are the one who has to say, let's move forward with this or let's hold off on it?
I would say I would be a part of it. I mean, to me, like that specific thing, anything that, is user facing, that is product, right? Like that's a product and then they have a process of how they work with the community and the different stakeholders. I shouldn't say just the community, right? Like all of the different stakeholders, right? So I think, like you've alluded to earlier, there is not just like one high level deciding factor for any of this kind of stuff, right? So I look at it as like, how do we create the conditions such that we can make a decision together on these things, right? And are there rare cases where I might have to like break a tie or say, no, we can't afford to do that? Yes. But usually those are already, we've already gotten to that up front, right?
Right.
Or earlier in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, and it's uncharted territory. I mean, this you can't point to a competitor and say, can't we do what they're doing, because no one else is doing it.
Yeah. In some areas, I mean, and that's the beauty of this project, right? I mean, I think everything, there's so much that is uncharted. The scale is uncharted. The doing it radically open is uncharted. All of these, doing it across 300 languages is uncharted. Like, so I give a lot of credit to the people all across the spectrum here who contribute every day and are committed to working through, where sometimes there's some actual tension, and rightfully so. Like you have to work through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Here's another. Well, this may or may not be a good question either, but it I wonder if, as a CTO, you find it strange that the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't, at least in its public-facing statements and so forth, doesn't really seem to view itself as a software development organization. It doesn't seem to. I mean, I remember going to a talk by Jimmy Wales about 10 years ago, maybe, where he was he wasn't, I don't know exactly what his role was, but he was more involved in day-to-day stuff than he is now. And he was talking about, Wikipedia getting into the top 10 websites and audience growth rates, and he was making fun of AOL, which was still in the top 10 but falling. He was sounding like a tech CEO basically, but. It seems like all the official communication coming out of the Wikimedia Foundation these days seems to be more about political advocacy, identity politics, or whatever you want to call it, which is strange because I think most of the people who work at the Wikimedia Foundation are in the tech, in doing tech stuff in one way or another. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I can't obviously speak to what Jimmy said 10 years ago or any other things, but, I mean, I look at what is this project trying, in these projects, what are we trying to achieve here, right? That grand vision of the sum of all knowledge freely available, right? And so, if you're alluding to things like knowledge equity and knowledge as a service, I absolutely will stand behind that. Our goal in supporting this movement is to make sure that the entire world has access to our content. I would say, and I would say that the ability to deliver and serve that knowledge is built on a technical infrastructure and a technical foundation. So it is absolutely a part of who we are and is a part of how we enable achieving that vision. So, I don't look at it as a binary question, right? It's a yes and for both, right?
Sure, that's true. Yeah. No, there's no, you can put out as many statements as you want. One doesn't conflict with the other. Sure. But it just seems, it just seems like the real interest is in the more political stuff and not in the tech stuff, or even in the joy of knowledge, for its own sake.
Yeah, I don't know. There might be some selection bias in there. Like, for instance, we take a lot of interest in things like CDA 230 and the legal right for our content to be served in the way it's served. We took a lot of interest in the .org sale, right?
Oh yeah,
and
right.
Those are things that are at its heart are very technical in nature, right? So I would say, yeah, sure, it can sometimes, you might feel that way, but it's not something that's necessarily there, right? Like, we try to advocate for access to our content and access to free knowledge across the board, and we want to make sure that knowledge is representative of all of the people of the world, right? So that's going to require both technical solutions and culture solutions and legal solutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I didn't have any problem with the .org thing. Yeah. All right. Moving on, I come from the so-called enterprise MediaWiki world, which is basically the use of MediaWiki outside of Wikimedia projects. How familiar are you with the use of MediaWiki in the outside world?
I would say somewhat familiar. I can proudly say I'm at least a former shared hosting MediaWiki deployer back in the day. I don't think I have an active one at the moment. I've had the good fortune already in my time of meeting with a lot of the folks who are using MediaWiki outside of the foundation. So, like, I'm aware of, the folks from NASA. Obviously, Fandom's a big user of MediaWiki. I know there's a lot of other companies and consultants and users of our software. So
yeah. Not to put you on the spot, do you know any of the non-Wikimedia technology that people use, like page forms or Semantic MediaWiki or Cargo or any of the Fandom innovations, the chameleon skin, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm a few of, just like some of the earlier projects
Right.
you'd named. I'm familiar with some of them, like Semantic MediaWiki. Some of the others, I know, our extension capabilities are quite significant. So a lot of people have plugged a lot of things in a lot of different places.
Sure.
So yeah. But I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the whole stack by any stretch.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just wondering. I'm realizing now a lot of these questions are kind of confrontational, but
That's all
all
good.
right. There's some controversy in the enterprise MediaWiki world about whether the Wikimedia Foundation should be doing more to help the enterprise MediaWiki effort. I'm not talking about the actual developers who are I think are doing a great job with things like finding extensions that are still using deprecated functions and helping people update and all of that. And of course, they just do a lot of work to make sure the MediaWiki is easy to install and upgrade, which is great. I don't think they get enough credit for all of that, but anyway, on the marketing side, the Wikimedia Foundation has essentially never done any marketing of MediaWiki. I mean, with just a few exceptions. Even the homepage at MediaWiki.org is kind of hilariously ambivalent about whether people should be using MediaWiki at all. Like there's a page called Deciding Whether to Use a Wiki, which is linked from the front page. And it actually lists more disadvantages than advantages to wikis. Do you have any thoughts about that?
In terms of whether, like, should the foundation be marketing MediaWiki per se, or just overall, the question of third party?
Yeah, should it be doing more marketing, either passively or actively? But yeah.
I don't know. Probably the question of should we be marketing it is probably above my pay grade. But like I look at. I've been an open source contributor for a long time, and this is me speaking of my personal experience with writing and maintaining open source software, is that there is a lot that goes into that. There's a lot that, I look at it as, I call it kind of the creator's dilemma, if you will, in that and I'm not saying we're just the creator of it, but at the open source community as a collective creator of the software, one of the things you have to think about a lot when you create software, open source software, especially more modern, right? We didn't think about this 20 years ago as much, but you have to think about what is going to be the life of that and how capable are you, and by you here, I mean the royal you, of maintaining that and, providing for security patches, et cetera, right? And so I think a lot about, like, how do we give clarity to all the people who are using the software as to what they can expect from us. Most of the conversations, I've probably met with 30 or 40 different people who are in the third party space, if you will, to date. A lot of what I hear back is, hey, we want to know that our extensions and the extension framework is going to be there and is predictable and kind of all the things you would expect of software. They want to know about how this stuff gets shipped and built so that there's predictability in terms of the delivery mechanisms, if you will. There's some folks who, of course, would like some lower level features implemented. And then there's, questions around like what databases do we support and stuff like that. My personal take, and this does not represent the foundation, is, we put out the software. I kind of look at it as, hey, if you want to come and play in our sandbox, and then we would love to have you. If you want us to come play in your sandbox, if the sandbox is nice and it fits with some of the things we want, then great. I don't know if I'm taking the playground analogy too far there. You're wrong,
I got lost there somewhere.
But yeah, I think it's amazing that everything we do in production is in open source, so that anybody who wants to learn from us and use our software is able to. Should we go so far as to market that? I don't know if that fits with the mission or not. Like I said, that's probably a broader question than just mine to answer.
Okay, that's fair. Well, some of it is really passive, just in terms of making the Mediawiki.org copy, the text that appears on there a little more upbeat.
Well, I would say, like, I'll put on my open source hat and say patches welcome, right? I mean, isn't that the beauty of all this stuff, is that, submit a patch, right? I mean, I would certainly welcome that. I actually haven't looked at it through that
Oh
lens.
yeah, no, sure. No, I wasn't talking about getting more developers in, although it's good that you talked about that too. I just mean, getting more people to download it and use it in their organizations and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of benefit. Like, that's the beauty of open source, right? The more eyeballs you have on something, the better the software gets, right? At the same time, we also have to put this software in production, right? And we have to serve, 20 billion page views. And
Right.
the cool thing is we've been able to serve both of these to date. And I look at this as an architectural question. And ideally, we can continue best we can. But, the world's changing in the way software is deployed as well, right? It's moving to Docker, it's moving to Kubernetes, that kind of stuff, right?
Right. Wait, what does that have? What does that have to do
Well,
with
just,
it?
like if the way the software gets shipped is different, right? And then you don't want that particular way of it being shipped, is that, like, how does that get resolved, right? I think that's, where a lot of these kinds of questions end up. And I don't have the answer there. I just know that the world's changed from the way we all did software 10 years ago when you got a big tarball, right?
Yeah. Sure. I'll take this opportunity to plug Mezzo, which is an enterprise Mediawiki distribution, which is, I think, a Docker image.
Awesome.
I'm not involved with it, but gosh, what was I gonna say? Well, you threw me off. No, that's definitely true. Yeah, okay. If someone asked you whether they should use Mediawiki, what would you say?
I would say take a look at your use cases and do you have a use for it? I mean, I'm always like, what is the value a piece of software is bringing me first and foremost? So
Sure.
if you have if you have a need for a wiki and you feel like you can leverage Mediawiki for it, and you're comfortable with the way the ecosystem exists and supports and all that, then go for it. That's the beauty of open source.
Sure.
I will never discourage anybody from doing that.
Getting back to what you said about patches welcome, if there's somebody listening who wants to start contributing to MediaWiki, are there any specific areas that you think are can use a lot more help, or just are something that they're really interesting to get involved in?
I don't know offhand. Like, I haven't spent a lot of time at that level. I do know we have a lot of people who help, ranging from getting started kind of things and internships and, kind of trying to help first timers get up to speed, all the way through to, very low level performance, et cetera, kinds of issues. So, I would say it depends on your area of expertise and what you like to work on, but yeah, there's so much here. Chances are you can find something to contribute to. I would also plug, like, users can show up in cloud services and contribute to on wiki tooling and that kind of stuff as well. And it doesn't require necessarily getting at the low level of MediaWiki itself, right? So you can still contribute that way too.
Yeah. Well, great. Those are all my questions. So, is there anything?
Yeah, this has been fantastic.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was a pleasure and an honor to have you on the program. So yeah, thanks, Grant, and thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks, Yaron, for having me. And for all your listeners out there, I can say, as a fellow podcaster for Yaron here, hit the subscribe button, hit those 5-star ratings, because that's what helps us all continue on. So please do that.
There you go. I don't even know if you can subscribe to this podcast. I guess you can. You probably can. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye. And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. A big thanks again to my guest, Grant Ingersoll, CTO of the Wikimedia Foundation, for a great interview. Happy Halloween to those of you who are celebrating it. In any case, stay productive, and I'll see you next time.